So what's the big deal with the whole NAFTA agreement between Canada and the United States? Okay. Now, in 1994, there was the signing of the NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement. Essentially, what this did was give powers to certain companies to be able to export certain aspects of their businesses, mainly that being labor. Now, we notice at that very same time when we look at the global rates of profit, there is a chart out there, like you can find on the first page of a Google search, that the rates of profit for many companies, this was even acknowledged by Thomas Piketty's book Capital in the 21st Century, but Marx's thing of the tendency of the rate of profit to follow isn't real because Marx is wrong. So that's basically what this was. This was about sending those jobs to cheaper labor markets. And in cases, Canada is a cheaper labor market than the United States, mainly because our dollar has less value when compared to the US dollar. Of course, Mexico is even cheaper. But the thing is, there's certain things like call centers, which, a lot of U.S. call centers have offices inside of Canada because, one, it is cheaper than the United States, and we are native English speakers. Well, most of us, anyway. But the same thing goes for manufacturing. Manufacturing, where you don't have to have, you don't have to have good English. You can just send it directly to Mexico, and then you can save an absolute ton of money. And then when that happened, and that largely being textiles and regular manufacturing, etc., the rates of profit for these companies skyrocketed because now they were spending less on labor. Now, this can also be applied to many of the natural resources, finished goods, etc., that were needed for the production process. This whole NAFTA wasn't something that the capitalist class just did out of greed. Oh, we just want more money, so we're going to find cheaper labor. I mean, that's a very traditional kind of liberal view. But the reality is that capitalism had to do it. This was something that they had to do, or the system was going to start failing because of the tendency of the rate of profit to fall. Manufacturing was shifted from the United States to China, not out of greed, but because manufacturing needed to be cheaper in order to prop up the rate of profit. So that's the main divide here between what would be a Marxist critique and what would be a liberal critique. Liberals would say, oh, it's just corporate greed. If we just legislate that, then it'll go away. Or we could be like Donald Trump and just say, make America great again, bring the jobs back, etc., and then everything will just magically be okay. Well, no, this relies on a false premise as to why the jobs were shipped to China, were shipped to Honduras, Indonesia, the great textile mill of the world, Bangladesh, etc. Not out of desire, but out of need. And this reminds us why the system cannot be reformed. The problem is the system itself. It is not some kind of internal corruption that liberals like to point to and say, oh, if we just get rid of this capitalist or we just regulate this, it'll go away. That is very systemic to the system itself. It must do this. I don't have time to go into the whole theory of the tendency of the rate of profit to fall. That would fall beyond the scope of this video, and something that I very highly recommend that you look up and gain a good knowledge of. So what Trump wants to do, and is something that has become very apparent from the way he acts, is that he really doesn't know what he's doing. He just says, okay, well, we're going to bring the jobs back. Because in his mind, importing from other countries means they're getting ripped off. But exporting is good. So it's very strange how his mind works, and there's a very overly simplistic way. When the United States mass exports corn products to Mexico, I suppose that's good for the United States. It makes them a lot of money. It completely annihilates Mexico. It destroyed farmers and forced them basically off their land because they could now no longer compete with cheap exports from the U.S. that were done through subsidies by the government. Yet he turns around and bitches and complains about Canadian subsidies to certain industries. So the United States is a massive hypocrite in this case. It completely devastated Mexico. I mean, just go into the history of NAFTA, Mexico, first page of a Google search, at least try to do that. you will find. I mean, this even went so far as to spark what was, I guess you could say, a civil war with the Zapatistas in Mexico rising up against the Mexican government, and that's another thing you should look into, etc. So what's important to keep in mind here is that not only does Trump not know what he's doing when it comes to trade, because it's very, very beneficial for the United States to import from other countries because it's cheaper than doing so domestically, and that is propping up the rate of profit. This is one of the reasons that not only Marx but Lenin, more specifically Lenin, talked about why capitalism cannot stay contained to one country. It must continually grow. It must continually expand across the entire planet. It has to go everywhere. It must absorb every corner of the world in order for that. It has to keep finding the cheaper and cheaper labor. It has to find the lower and lower cost raw materials or finished goods, etc., for the production process. And that's what we're looking at. And that's what Donald Trump doesn't understand. And that is what previous administrations did understand to a degree. They wouldn't actually acknowledge that it's a law of capitalism itself, and thus is a reason why capitalism should be abolished, but they just accepted that as an aspect of the American empire, as a way of maintaining American interests. In other words, they knew how horrible it was, they just didn't care, because it was in their interest to continue to do so. The difference being that Donald Trump doesn't understand how the system works, even if previous administrations were unwilling to acknowledge how bad it really is. So that's basically NAFTA. Now let's talk about specifically the United States and Canada. Now, the United States is an imperialist power, and Canada is a junior partner in imperialism. Obviously, it doesn't have the military or economic power that the United States has. However, it does carry out a great deal of imperialism itself, specifically with regards to the mining industry. We are a very large economy when it comes to dealing with mining, and we have the worst human rights record. That's right, Canadian mining has worse human rights records internationally than American mining companies do. So think about that the next time Canada likes to try to act that somehow it's morally superior to the United States, because frankly we're not. It's a matter of quantity, not a matter of quality. So basically, the United States has a massive glut in the dairy industry, largely due to the fact that they've cut off trade with other countries. Now, what they want to do is that when you have a lot of something, you have a glut, the price goes down. Basic market forces, nothing really different here in that regard. So what they want to do is they want to offload it into Canada, because milk doesn't keep very well. You can't just like ship it overseas and have it be on a ship for 2 weeks while it's going over to Europe or Africa or something. So you have to send it somewhere very quickly right away. And the best market for that is Canada, because it has the average income level enough to make it profitable to be able to sell it enough, and it's close enough to get it there before it expires. The problem is that Canada has very tight control over its dairy industry. Because it's so fragile, because we live so close to the United States, that cheap milk threatens our dairy industry and then would end up being overtaken by the United States, which is why we have so much regulation, which is why we have so much government oversight in the dairy industry, is to protect us. What Trump wants is for that to be gone, so that they can just dump all their excess milk supply into our country, killing off our dairy farmers, killing off our whole, basically, dairy industry, and then when they go bankrupt or they become virtually incapable of supplying Canada with dairy products, we become dependent on the United States for that. Well, that's really the rub, isn't it? Because it's not just about taking care of a glut. You could just reduce the supply. It's about still continuing to sell it and then making it necessary for them to have to do so. There's nothing it does better for profits than necessity, something that you have to buy. You don't really You don't really have a choice. And milk is a very large part of the North American diet. We could change it, but realistically, are we just going to massively change our diets overnight? No, it's not going to happen. So that's the real issue there. One of the things that's still lagging. Now, previously, our Prime Minister Trudeau has been very resistant to that. However, it seems like he's waning a little bit on it. Like he's starting to come around, starting to agree somewhat with the United States on this issue, wanting to let them come in, even though it's going to be bad for Canada. Basically because, well, to be straight up honest, the abolishment of NAFTA, these frankly illegal tariffs that are being placed on Canada, etc., are having a negative effect. I mean, they are hurting our industries. That's the point of tariffs in this case, is to cause harm. So when we have a NAFTA agreement, Trump just pulls out of it because he says, oh, it's no good, worst deal ever, oh my God, worst deal ever. When it was extremely beneficial for the United States. Because in his very limited little mind, export good, import bad. When in reality, economics is far more complicated than that. You have comparative advantage, etc., dealing with the falling rate of the tendency of the rate of profit to fall, as I said previously. What I'm hoping is that, although while I have no particular loyalty to an imperialist government like Canada, I would hope that Canada would not give more power to the United States by conceding on this point and allowing them to have that much power. It's not that I particularly have pride as a Canadian. It's that I don't want the American empire to have even more power. This is not an altar that I'm willing to throw myself on, not something that I'm going to make into a major issue that I want to stand up for, like imperialism, etc. Like, it's just not that important to me. But it would be good, it would be nice if Trudeau didn't roll over and do so. Because I think that there's something very, very negative that would come out of this. If Trudeau does roll over and just accepts the fact that NAFTA was violated by the United States and just gives them a completely new deal, one that is really not beneficial to us, then he will have proven, one, that he has no spine, which I already suspect is true. It will send a message to the United States that they can do whatever they want. They can just violate any agreement that they have signed with us. They can just violate any treaty, any trade agreement, and then just do whatever they want, and there will be no consequences for it. It's kind of like a bully in school. Eventually, someone has to stand up to the guy and stop him so that he learns that he can't do this to people. It's the same kind of situation. That's a way of describing the United States economically across the world. Of course, it's more complicated than that, being an empire, not just a bully. But that's just, those are my thoughts on the situation with the rewriting of NAFTA between the United States and Canada. And I hope you learned something from this video, or at least got a bit of a different perspective to maybe give you a better idea of what's going on.
Thank you for watching. If you like this program, then please head over to my Patreon page and set up a monthly donation. It's your donations that keep this program running. Also, if you would like, please rate, comment, subscribe, and share in various social media.